There were 14 people in that boardroom. My father sat at the head of the table, the seat he had chosen for himself on the very first day we moved into that office. My brother sat 2 chairs to his left, arms crossed, the way he always sits when he thinks he has already won. They had invited me to this shareholder meeting expecting one thing, my silence. What they got instead was a folder. Inside that folder was the original partnership agreement, signed by all 3 of us on a Tuesday morning 4 years ago in a coffee shop on 5th Street, with a notary we had found online the night before. Inside that folder was an email chain, 47 emails, my father and brother discussing, in their own words, how to remove me from the company I had built. And inside that folder was a letter from my therapist, the therapist they had told the entire board I desperately needed because I was too unstable to run a business. My name is David Torres. I am 31 years old. I quit law school to build something real, and the 2 people who said they believed in me most tried to erase me from it completely. They almost succeeded. Almost. The word they used was dropout. Not always to my face, more often behind my back, at family dinners I wasn't at, in conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. My father had a way of saying it that made it sound like a diagnosis. My brother had a way of repeating it that made it sound like a joke. I left law school at 26, not because I failed, not because I couldn't handle it. I left because I had an idea that wouldn't let me sleep, and I was afraid if I waited until I had the right credentials and the right timing and the right everything, the idea would belong to someone else by then. The idea was a logistics software platform, a tool to help mid-sized distribution companies track inventory in real time across multiple warehouses. Boring, maybe, to some people. To me, it was everything. I pitched it to my father and my brother over a dinner that lasted 3 hours. By the end of that dinner, we had agreed we would build this together. Equal partners, my idea, my architecture, their capital, their connections. I should have known, even then, that not all agreements are equal, even when the signatures are. We launched the company in the spring 4 years ago. The 3 of us, Torres Family Logistics Solutions, a name I never loved but agreed to because it mattered to my father. The first 18 months were brutal and extraordinary at the same time. We were working out of a shared office space, surviving on contracts that barely covered costs, rebuilding the platform every 3 weeks as we learned what our clients actually needed. I was coding until 2 in the morning most nights. I was the one on calls with clients, on site for implementations, writing the documentation, training the users. My father handled investor relations and brought in 2 early clients through his network. My brother managed the finances, the books, the payroll, the vendor contracts. It was not easy, but it was ours, and in those early months, it meant something. The first sign that something was shifting came quietly, as these things always do. About 2 years in, after we had signed our first enterprise client and the revenue started to look real, my father began scheduling meetings I wasn't invited to. Not all meetings, just certain ones. Strategy sessions with the board, calls with the new investors we had brought on. When I asked about them, he said I was too deep in the technical side to need to be in the room. He said I should trust him and Marcus, my brother, to handle the business side. He said it the way you say something to a child when you want them to stop asking questions. I was busy enough that I let it go longer than I should have. Then came the conversation that changed everything. I had been going through a difficult period personally. A relationship had ended. I was sleeping badly. I had started seeing a therapist, something I did quietly, on my own, because I believed in taking care of myself the way I took care of my code, proactively, before things broke. I told my father about the therapy during what I thought was a casual lunch. I told him because I trusted him. I told him the way a son tells a father something personal, expecting nothing except maybe a nod. 3 weeks later, I was called into a board meeting I had not been told about. My father stood at the front of the room,
and explained to the board, our investors, our advisors, most of whom he had personally selected, that he had serious concerns about my mental stability, that I had been struggling significantly, that for the protection of the company, the board should consider restructuring leadership to ensure continuity. He had taken the most private thing I shared with him and built a case out of it. The board voted to remove me from my role as Chief Technology Officer pending a review period. I would retain my equity stake on paper for now, but I would have no operational authority, no seat at decision-making tables. In the weeks that followed, I watched my brother quietly move into my office. I watched the job postings go up for roles I had held. I watched my name disappear from the company website. They did not fire me. They had been smarter than that. They had simply made me invisible and waited for me to leave. I did not leave.
I want to be honest with you about the first few weeks felt like after that board meeting. They were dark, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, hollowed-out way. I kept thinking I had imagined it. I kept thinking there had been some miscommunication, some version of events I was missing that would make my father's actions make sense. I went back to therapy, not because I was unstable, but because I needed someone outside of everything to help me think clearly. My therapist asked me one question that cut through everything. She said, "What do you have in writing?" I went home that night and pulled out every document I had ever touched in connection with the company, the original partnership agreement, every email I had ever sent or received from my father and brother, every contract I had signed, every meeting note I had kept, every version of the equity schedule. And somewhere in the middle of that, while going through an old shared email thread, I found it. A chain of 47 emails between my father and brother sent to a shared account I had been copied on by mistake at one point and therefore had retained access to, going back 14 months. 14 months of conversations about how to manage what my father called the David situation. In one email, my father wrote, "We need to remove him quietly before the Series B closes. If we wait until after, his equity becomes harder to dilute." In another, "Use the therapy thing. It's the cleanest angle." In another, my brother wrote, "What if he lawyers up?" My father replied, "He won't. He never does. That's always been his problem." I read that email 3 times. Then I called an attorney. I want to tell you something important about this part of the story, because it is the part that people often skip over when they talk about justice. Justice is not a moment. It is a process, and that process is tedious and expensive and requires you to hold your composure for longer than any reasonable person should have to. I spent 6 weeks preparing. My attorney reviewed the original partnership agreement and confirmed what I already knew. It was legally binding. It established equal thirds ownership, and no amendment had ever been properly filed to change that structure. The board's vote to remove me from my operational role had been procedurally valid, but it had not and could not touch my ownership stake without my written consent, which had never been given. She also reviewed the email chain. Her assessment was careful and clear. The emails documented a deliberate, coordinated strategy to deprive me of my ownership rights through misrepresentation. That was actionable. Then she asked about the therapy. I contacted my therapist and explained the situation. She reviewed her records, 18 months of session notes documenting our work together, and confirmed in writing that at no point during our therapeutic relationship had I displayed indicators of instability that would impair my professional judgment. She provided a formal letter on letterhead stating the same. My father had told the board I was struggling significantly. My therapist's documentation showed a consistent, stable client working proactively on personal growth. He had not just weaponized my vulnerability, he had lied about it. I organized everything into a single binder: the original partnership agreement, the equity schedule, the email chain printed and indexed, and the therapist's letter. I also prepared a 1-page timeline showing every operational decision I had made for the company in the 12 months before my removal. client acquisitions, product updates, revenue milestones, things the company wouldn't have had without me, things that no one had bothered to dispute. The annual shareholder meeting was 6 weeks away. I was still a shareholder. I had the right to attend. I had the right to speak. I RSVP'd. 14 people in that boardroom. My father at the head of the table, my brother 2 seats to his left. I arrived early. I signed in. I set my binder on the table in front of me. My attorney sat beside me. My father looked at her, and something shifted in his face, just slightly, just enough. The meeting opened with standard business, revenue updates, growth projections, my brother presenting slides he had built from frameworks I had originally designed. I sat quietly and let it all proceed. When the floor opened for shareholder business, I raised my hand. I presented the original partnership agreement first. I walked the board through the equity structure, which had never been legally amended. I presented the timeline of my contributions, the client wins, the product milestones, the revenue directly attributable to my work, cross-referenced with the dates of my removal. Then I placed the email printouts on the table, copies for every board member. I did not read every email aloud. I read 3. The one about removing me before the Series B, the one about using the therapy angle, and the one where my brother asked what if I lawyered up. The room was very quiet. Then my attorney presented the therapist's letter. She spoke briefly and precisely. The characterization of my mental state that had been presented to this board was not supported by any clinical documentation, and in fact directly contradicted by 18 months of professional records. My father tried to speak. His own attorney stopped him. The board chair asked for a recess. When they came back, they voted to reinstate my operational authority pending a full legal review. 3 board members resigned before the end of the month. The review took 11 weeks. At the end of those 11 weeks, I was confirmed as majority shareholder and chief executive officer of my own company. My father and brother were bought out at a valuation that reflected their actual contribution, not the one they had constructed for themselves in my absence. The buyout was not small. My father and brother received compensation for their legitimate equity stake. I want to be clear about that, because fairness matters even here. But they walked away from something worth significantly more than what they got, because the growth of the company from that point forward would not include them. 2 years later, we closed a Series B round at a valuation that made the original company look like a sketch on a napkin. I did not contact my father after the board meeting. He contacted me once 6 months later, with a message that was mostly about regret and some about money. I read it once. I did not reply. My brother and I have spoken twice. Both conversations were short. They were not warm, but they were honest, and that is more than we had before. The company is mine now, truly mine, in a way it never fully was when I was sharing the table with people who were counting the days until they could take it. My team doesn't know all of this. They know I fought for the company. They know I won. That is enough. My therapist does know. At our next session after the shareholder meeting, she said something I think about often. She said, "You protected your mind and your work at the same time. That's rare." I told her, I learned from my father. He just didn't realize which lesson he was teaching. If David's story reminded you that the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimates you is let them keep underestimating you right up until the moment you're ready, hit the like button. That one's for the builders, the ones who keep the receipts and stay quiet until it counts. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Has someone in your life ever used something personal you shared with them, a struggle, a vulnerability, a private truth, and turned it into a weapon against you? You don't have to share the whole story, even just yes. Drop it in the comments. You are not alone in that. And wherever you're listening from tonight, drop your city and the time where you are. The lounge reaches further than you might think, and I love knowing exactly where. If this story is speaking to someone you know, someone who built something real and is watching it be taken from them right now, share it with them. Sometimes the only thing a person needs to keep going is to know that someone else already did.
I'll see you in the next story. The lounge is always open.